board bat, hardy plank, but now with this new presentation, you'll see additional stone and brick added as features, as well as a brick or stone ledge that would encircle all elevations of each structure, whether or not it's board bat or all brick. You're going to have brick elevation shown, at least in the foundation skirting there. So they have changed the design and wish to present that to the Planning Commission regarding, previous discussion that we had on those elevations. I'll be happy to answer any questions Commission has, or the applicant is here as well to discuss more in detail, or if you have any specific questions for me, I'm available. Thank you.
Mr. Archibald, just looking at the screen that I'm looking at now, just for clarification, are those two elevations both being presented to us here tonight, or is one of them the previous one and one what is a replacement of it, or is it just a combination of either of those two elevations that we're looking at?
Okay, the elevation I think Mr. McCarthy has up there are current elevations that's being presented, except different models. Is that correct, or?
No, we just pulled, so there's several models and variations on each model. So we pulled two of the models and variations within them. So this is the Belmont, and on the top it shows what was submitted for the application you reviewed in May, and you deferred and directed them to work on this some more. The one on the bottom is part of their current submittal.
Okay.
But it was, Robert and I were talking today, it was unclear exactly. It seems like there is still a all board and batten option for the Belmont, but it does include brick on the base that goes around the side elevations. Is that correct?
That's correct. That was a feature that was added as a result of the conversations. So, and I just spoke with the applicant, just got some clarity on that, and he'd be glad to speak to that and assure the commission that they have changed the elevations, and they have. And I think one of the biggest changes that I noticed under review this time was that at least the foundation skirting brick table or stone has now been shown on all elevations, regardless of what option is chosen by the applicant.
But to answer the question, the top is the May submittal, the bottom is the current submittal.
Thank you. I think that's what I was thinking or assuming. So.
I just have a procedural question, Mr. Chairman. So when this came to us in June, it was here for what would have been a master plan approval, which would have been the final step in their process. We expressed some reservations regarding some of the elevations and what they had presented.
That's correct.
That they've now brought back that have shown some pretty clear upgrades and seemingly complying with some of what was suggested at the June meeting. Is that right?
That's correct.
And so the revision is actually just a revision from the original master plan that they presented in June that was not approved.
That is correct. Yes, sir.
And with respect to density and what this is adding, this does not change at all the number that was previously approved. Is that also correct?
You are correct. It does not change the bulk standards nor any density. This is just concerning the elevations of 9 models as presented.
Thank you, Mr. Archibald. That's all I have.
Thank you.
So Robert, like on the Belmont that you're showing there, so there's 5 different types of that model. Do we know, and 2 of those are just fiber cement board, there's no masonry in it shown. Do we know what percentage maybe of that type model might be constructed? I guess my only question is while there may be an elevation I that is showing what you're seeing here on the bottom.
Yes, sir.
That's one of 5 elevations. There may only be one of those built in the entire subdivision.
That's correct. I did not receive any type of percentage of dispersion of any of these models here. But once again, the applicant may be able to clear that up, but staff did not directly receive any type of percentage where these were going to be applied in the development.
Yes, ma'am, Dr. Martin.
So, Mr. Archibald, that's the concern. I really appreciate going through the 55 pages and seeing the different pictorial views.
Yes.
But in all the other reading in my notes that I took, I had no way of knowing. Usually I can say, 17, 20%, whatever that's going to be, but we can't tell that by this. We've got a lot of different views, and the percentages of what's going to be stone or brick or that, but we don't know how many models.
And I do understand that concern. That's staff's concern as well. I don't have a percentage to present. I do know that they've made changes that possibly addressed some of the concerns that the Planning Commission had at the previous meeting, but I did not receive any percentage type of dispersion for those options, and that is a concern. Most developers are going to offer multiple models, and they're all going to have price differentiation. So it's a possibility that you could see the Belmont with the board and bat versus the brick style in most parts of the subdivision. However, that being said, there is a note on there, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that will indicate that even though it might not be shown on the elevation, there was a note, I think, that was included in that packet that indicated brick or stone on all elevations. Whether or not it was board bat, there should be a note in that packet there. But that's, like I said, I don't have the percentage of.
So I've got one overarching question. So if you're looking at this packet, if we're approving or if we're reviewing this particular packet, there's front elevations of the different units, right? But then there's rear and sides that apply to all. And so if you look, like the one that has a stone water table, the rear and the side elevations is just siding. That's how this packet reads. So that doesn't comply to our current zoning ordinance, which, has to, I think the material has to continue through the second layer, et cetera, et cetera. And basically what this would create is a facade of material with nothing behind it. Or at least that's how it reads. I do see the note saying that all units have masonry from top of slab to grade, which could theoretically solve some of that, but I would want to see that represented, at least dashed line or something that says it makes it very hard to enforce from anybody that's going to go out on site, because they could have a one row lock, a brick that's hidden under the soil.
And Mr. Sloan, to your point there, sir, I review a lot of the documentation that comes in on the permits, and architectural standards are applied through our zoning ordinance. On smaller things, that's how we would handle that. But I do understand your concern that it probably needs to be presented to the Planning Commission, since it's an approval item for this body.
And you said the applicant's here, is that Mr. Vick?
Mr. Vick, and I think Mr. Davidson is here as well.
Okay, gotcha. Whichever one, wants to. So just make sure, let me start with a question. As we just start with the very first one being the Belmont, it looks like, as we discussed, there's 5 different elevations, and they range from virtually what we saw on the front end to improve with brick, but your request is to do all 5 with no breakdown as to what percentage of which ones will go where and things of that nature?
Correct. So originally when we brought it through, I think there was a little bit of misunderstanding that we did plan to use brick to grade throughout. So we used the table that's on the sheets there to better describe, at a minimum, brick to grade. The percentages are further broken down for the face of the home. And I mean, we bring multiple elevations for each floor plan, so we can differentiate within the community. So, I mean, for the amount of homes that we're building, 9 floor plans are not a lot. So we need different, breakdowns of stone, brick, gable design, whatever else. So we can, again, price point, and then also differentiate and use the same floor plans throughout.
Am I understanding the sides and rear elevations are just going to be smooth siding, not like just vinyl siding, I guess? Is that the plans on?
Yeah, they're going to be hardy, and a minimum. You will be able to see the brick. You got 6 inches per code, so you will be able to see the brick and the roll lock.
So this is a PUD revision. This may be a question for staff, but of the original ones that were approved that we're trying to do a revision to, were they, for example, what was their side and rear elevations? Do we know what that consisted of by chance?
So in the original PUD, which I think was brought through in 2022, I didn't get a good look at the side elevations. I think there was some confusion at the last planning commission that potentially the brick was brought all the way up, and that was not the case. I do not know if it was exposed block or if it was brick to grade. And so we're just asking for a minor PUD revision to bring our elevations to the project. And the 2 big items were the porches and brick.
Right.
And I think we've addressed those, and
You've added them as an addition to the previous ones that exclude them as well as an option.
correct. And there were some details that were further enhanced on some of those elevations that are siding, some gables and things of that nature, shutters.
Shalon, did that answer your question? Maybe to side elevations.
I mean, it doesn't. It explains that the brick's going to go to grade from the foundation, but the material isn't continuing through the second layer per our new zoning ordinance.
Yeah.
So, like, basically, it's going to be, you'll have, if you look on the side of the building, you'll see like a little sliver of brick and then hardy.
So is this traveling under our new zoning ordinance, or is this
That's-
approved prior to the new zoning ordinance?
It was, I'm trying to think. Okay, I was thinking it was 36.
Yeah, so
When it came in an original plan, it had one set of elevations. You've gone through the preliminary plating and the master plan. This is coming back asking for a revision to those that it was originally approved under.
And the revision being the changes to these elevations, which are not in compliance with what our current zoning ordinance would require, but that would otherwise still be an upgrade from what they were required to do under the former ordinance.
I think it's unfortunate we don't have the old ones on here, but I think we're kind of comparing the previous approved ones to this, but it is a deviation on the PUD, so you can review it whichever way you would like to, honestly.
This is, oh, I apologize.
No, I was just gonna, I think on what we're looking at on screen now, Mayor, is what was originally approved a couple years ago when it was, I believe, under Old South, but that's irrelevant. It was bricked, it had pretty, detailed porches, things of that nature. And so when the applicant came in a couple of months ago, there was significant deviations from what was previously approved on those elevations. They were basically at that time pretty much all hardy, no brick on the fronts. Several of them didn't, and still I don't think have much of a front porch. Just have that stoop to go into the front door. But so those were the concerns expressed back in April, and so they took it back to readdress some of the elevations, and that's what we're looking at today. Mr. Carthy, did you have something to add, I think?
No, just that I had been able to get to the original elevations here. And it doesn't indicate the side elevation, but I think the understanding at the time of the original PUD approval was that the material would go around the side elevations. Though they aren't depicted here.
No, they were brick to grade at a minimum.
And that, to me, seems to be some uncertainty and some confusion that is a little bit of a problem if we don't know what the original approval was or what was expected versus what they're now saying was.
If I'm understanding correctly, you're asking, did the brick go up to the roof break? Is that the question on the Old South plans? Because it was, I can't remember if it was exposed block or if it was brick to grade, but they did not have brick on the sides.
And you're getting that information from just these drawings, or is there something different that you have access to than what staff?
Looking back on when we purchased the property from the floor plans that were given to us.
Yeah, so these are the elevations that were included in the ordinance that established the PUD and established the standard that they are now held to. If you recall, last year they made significant modification to the plan, the site, and one of the technical comments was, "Are you updating the elevations?" And they said no, they're going to stay with the elevations that Old South provided at that time. And then earlier this year, they made the application to revise the elevations for Brightland's product. So this is what they are modifying. This is what was submitted and provided, incorporated into the ordinance that established the PUD that they're under now.
So are these elevations an improvement from what was originally approved? I guess is what I'm trying to figure out. I'm not the expert on that. I mean, somebody up here is, but Mr. McCarthy, I think that's you. I mean,
Not at all. I mean, it's up to the planning commission, right? So our job is to make sure, like when they come in for building permits, to hold that up next to what the planning commission has said is the standard for the PUD.
okay, well then let me ask a question that maybe you can answer. Are these requests in compliance with our ordinance?
Well, the ordinance that controls this piece of property is the PUD ordinance, and it was adopted modifying standards of 3638, the previous zoning ordinance. But the PUD controls this piece of property, and it's these elevations that were provided by Old South at the time that are the standard we would use.
And so if we denied these revisions, then they would be able to go back to the default of what was previously approved under the old zoning ordinance, correct?
As modified by the Planned Unit Development Master Plan, which is this original submittal.
It's my understanding it's a change of the applicant. I mean, when this was presented and these floor plans were presented, these were a different builder's product. And then when this product was purchased, who came in and when they made the revisions to the PUD said, we're not going to change the elevation? Was that the previous owner or was that?
No, so it was Brightland. I think it had a different name at the time, but it's the applicant that's in front of you now.
Okay. So originally we were not going to change these elevations and now you're requesting to change the elevations?
So that history was prior to me coming on board with Brightland. What I do know is that we have no intentions of coming back to you guys for the townhomes. I think, again, I wasn't there for that time, but I mean, I think we are bringing an improved product here. As far as the history of it, I mean, a couple of years has gone by. The market changes. I mean, again, we've added the porches, greater details, a lot of brick, stone, a better floor plan in our opinion, and it's more in line with the current market.
Which is what? In terms of the current price market or?
No, I think buyers' needs and desires. I think, it's again, I know this is all subjective, but I mean, I think these elevations profile better to the current Columbia market, which again, the brick, the stone, the details in the gables, all the above. I mean, I think it's going to create a great streetscape.
I did have one quick question on the facades. For the board and batten, is that cementitious material?
Can you describe that for me?
The board and batten vertical, is it cementitious or is it going to be vinyl?
No, it's all hardy. Yeah,
It's all
it's
hardy.
yeah, it's all
Okay. I
hardy.
didn't see
Yeah, we
when
don't
I
have
saw
any
the lab.
soffits or vinyl, but that's it.
Okay, so there's no other vinyl.
Yeah. Right.
Can I ask a question?
Mr. Sloan, please go ahead.
All right. So if you pull up PUDs, they're dictated by whatever standard they're approved under and whatever variances they ask at the time, correct? So under our previous 3639 PUDs located along certain major highways, which this would be included in, the building facade, finished building materials shall be applied to all sides of a building visible to the general public. And there's other kind of uniform, consistent, there's other kind of language in there that kind of indicates a similar intent as our current code. But I think the short is if they're asking for modifications to the elevations, wouldn't the intent be to bring that up to current standards?
I mean, if we're asking for a modification to elevations, I would defer to staff, but I would think that that could be a request or.
Like if it wasn't a variance originally.
So they have a vested right in the PUD, including the elevations that Old South provided. So it would be a request to modify that vested right, which the Planning Commission could decline to approve.
And that vested right is what I'm trying to figure out is the elevations in that vested right as they compare to the elevations that are being provided here, which more closely align to what we would now require. Because what we don't want to do is getting into a situation, and Vice Mayor Martin, you remember these, where we deny something because we don't think that it makes a lot of sense or it's not right, Councilman Coleman, but then they ultimately will straight zone it. And then all of a sudden we end up with, more density than we would have had if we'd have approved in the first place. And so with respect to their vested right, because if they're denied tonight, then they default back to what they have a vested right in. Mm-hmm. Are these more closely aligned with what our current zoning ordinance would require, or are there vested rights? Because I think that could take us down the same trail.
So right now, this primary material has to be on the facade, and it has to continue through the depth of the second layer, which is 20 feet. Any transition in material has to occur at some sort of architectural change, like a column, or so it's not just one material butts up to another material. There's got to be some sort of transition there. These look like they would conform to that standard. Just a cursory evaluation, it looks like these would conform if this was, say, CD3. Although the facades that don't have the foundation cladding in brick or natural stone would have to be modified. They otherwise look like they would conform in terms of materials. There's other elements of the facades that wouldn't conform, namely the garages jump out right away. So what Mr. Sloan read from 3638, the portions of the building that are visible from the public, there are a couple of lots in this development that have their rears facing Nashville Highway, but for the most part, the sides, would kind of meet that same standard that we have now in the ordinance of being beyond that transition in the second layer. Does that answer your question, Mr. Mulder?
Well, it sounds like what you're saying is that these elevations as presented with a requested revision do more closely align our current ordinance versus the previous elevations. that they have their vested right in. In which case, I would support this request because it means that the net result is a positive over what the prior elevations that they could go back to would be. And then we also would have the opportunity, wouldn't we, to require that the dwelling units that were facing Nashville Highway go all the way around in terms of the finishings, such that it wouldn't just be the siding or the hardy board. It would be whatever it would incapacitate the whole thing. Could we not require that?
Yes, so you could make it a part of the PUD that the primary material continues. Well, you can make it continue around all elevations, or you could say where it's visible from the public right of way.
Okay. All right.
If given more time, would staff be able to more properly evaluate whether this revision more closely aligns to current zoning standards or the Old South version?
Well, I can tell you now that neither of them would 100% conform with every variation on the elevations, but both with minor modifications would. Talking only about the primary materials, not garages and other elements of the facade.
So Kevin, with other PUDs that we've reviewed, they give us a list of variances from the ordinance. Shouldn't that be a requirement, even if they're underneath the old ordinance, to tell us what? Because the more I read in the old one, I mean, all building elevations shall be faced in a uniform and consistent manner. Exterior building materials, exterior. I lost it. But anyway, there's a couple of criteria there that I don't feel like this quite meets. But I mean, if they're asking for a variance from that, then that should be very clearly spelled out. And instead of having to draw it, like, I guess my initial concern was what I saw in a drawing didn't reflect what I was being told. And so, it one way or the other, it's going to be indicated that it's going to meet or deviate from, because that's how we're in this spot right now. Is that original PUD didn't tell us what was going to deviate from the original zoning ordinance, other than the rendering and the elevation, right?
Yeah, so the previous ordinance didn't have nearly the level of prescriptions that you have for architecture now. So the modifications they would be giving you would be less specific because there was less specific things to modify. But this is a great illustration of the discussion you all had last week, where no two PUDs are the same. We're working now to make sure that those documents are consistent across different approvals. But some of the PUDs we have, here's what we are proposing to have illustrated, and they don't have full descriptions of deviations from the applicable standards. Others have very detailed descriptions. This one is sort of in between. Mr. Keltner, would you expand on that at all?
No, I think it's a good point. PUDs in general are fairly subjective, especially when it comes to the architecture. The only thing we're looking at is what was approved prior to and what you're seeing now. There are, as to Kevin's point, there are differences. It's hard to compare the two. They're two different styles for a lot of between the two different requests. Material-wise, I think the only real question was porches. This one has a lot of stoops in it versus porches. And then we were talking about the masonry material, which fiber cement board is masonry, but it was more specific to the brick. This one has that added to it now, but the question is just, well, how many of those are going to be constructed? Because it does have models in there that have none of that.
Don't you think that perhaps the 30 days would allow you some time to get some of these communications with staff? I mean, I understand that's going to cause you a 30-day delay, but honestly, I think from my perspective, if you are able to communicate with staff and get some numbers that maybe provide some parameters around that, I'd feel a lot more comfortable to vote to approve this, because it does appear as though, it is a better overall product, but I also want to make sure that we're not being short-sighted in how this is handled. So I would make a motion to defer.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I just want to say for the record, if you look at this, and in that descriptive for the designs and the drawings, you're seeing brick or stone 50%. You're seeing brick 14%. You're seeing 0. So it's all over the place, and I'm just not comfortable with that.
So some clarification
Yeah.
as reference would be good. Okay, so I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll call the vote.
Councilman Coleman,
Aye.
Dr. Martin,
Aye.
Mayor Mulder,
Aye.
Mr. Shannon,
Aye.
Mr. Sloan,
Aye.
Ms. Williams,
Aye.
Mr. Gay.
Aye. Items deferred. Thank you. Next item tonight, item number 2 on our discussion items is a request from Eric McNeely for preliminary plat and site development plan approval of Hampshire Hills Townhomes consisting of 14 units at 1316 Hampshire Pike, being tax map 89, Group A, parcel 15.
This property was formerly zoned MRC. Under the new zoning ordinance, it is zoned CD4C, which does permit townhouses as a use. The applicant in this case is proposing 14 townhouses. It does meet the density requirements at 14 units per acre. The CD4C allows up to 24 units per acre. This property is located on the north side of Hampshire Pike. The commission may recall we previously approved under the old zoning ordinance a subdivision just to the north of the subject site that does connect in with Ladue Manor. Nevertheless, it does meet the zoning ordinance for parking standards, landscaping standards, and street standards. Just noting that any approval of this would be subject to conditions of approval that staff has outlined. If you can go to the conditions slide. Just that all retaining walls will be clad in brick and or permitted material type. So this site development plan does show a retaining wall located at the rear of the property, and then it does show a retaining wall being proposed in the new right-of-way section. And the zoning ordinance does require retaining walls to be clad in brick, natural stone, and or authentic stucco over masonry. Second condition is that we do receive an as-approved plan before receiving the land disturbance permit or construction plans. This as-approved document just ensures that any conditions that the Planning Commission additionally may impose on this item, that we have that addressed before we receive the land disturbance permit, and then any other conditions that may be listed in the technical comments. So those would be the 3 items staff would recommend if the commission were to approve this be subject to.
Mr. Brassel, just real quick, just looking at it first, parking, is there ample parking as far as the number of units, and will on-street park, and this is going to be an ingress, egress onto the Hampshire Pike, so is overflow parking going to run into parking on the street out there?
Yes, sir. So the parking ratio for townhome units in the CD4C is 1.5 spaces per unit. They're showing 28 parking spaces, so that is adequate for the 14 units that are there. This site development plan does indicate elevations or footprints, so to speak, that do show the adequate area for parking, interior parking, that meets that requirement. And then it is noted that any elevation design would come at building permit subject to the CD4C standards. And then it does also meet the parking requirements for the defined civic space, which in this case, the applicant is proposing a playground civic space. That's required to meet the 5% civic space requirement for the code.
So is there, Austin, is there total, it looks like they have 28 to count for the units, and then they have 9 on-street parking that's extra.
Correct.
Plus 1 for the civic there, so they're at that 37, well, I'm sorry, that's the ones included in that, so 37 spaces total, I guess.
I believe so, yes,
So
sir.
overflow would be there's 9 spaces
Okay,
there
so
on
that,
the street for overflow.
that answers my question. So the 9 street park spaces are in addition to the 28 that we're, right.
Yeah, so there would be 2 parking spaces for the garages and then 2 driveway parking spaces behind the units.
And this was originally,
Yeah, it actually
commercial zoning?
it actually was MRC under the previous zoning ordinance, and by default MRC became CD4C. So under the previous zoning ordinance, townhouses would have been an allowed use.
They were allowed as well. Okay.
Yes, sir.
This is obviously across from some schools, Whitthorne, Central. I know that is a hard highway, a tough highway as far as crossing the sidewalks and stuff. There is a crosswalk, I believe, to the, I'm not sure I'm right on this, to the west of this site, just a little bit down the road.
Kevin, if we can pull up the aerial inset map
There it is.
on the screen. Okay.
I see the sidewalk. It looks like it continues up to, I guess, just to the end of the right of way.
Yes, sir. So you're describing the Dollar General store that's right there in the sidewalk in front of it, where the crosswalk is.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there's a utility gas facility next to that.
Next to that.
Yeah, and unfortunately the sidewalk doesn't continue on the north side of
There's no
Hampshire Pike.
sidewalk on the actual Hampshire Pike side. Just
Not near this particular parcel, unfortunately.
as this gets developed out, is there a way to promote some connectivity or some sidewalk access from a walkability perspective to, I know,
Yeah, I think certainly anytime we have an opportunity to get sidewalks in the right of way, we want to promote that. Certainly, we do have to have a rational nexus for encouraging the applicant to provide a sidewalk into the public right of way. Typically, rational nexus is an adjacent sidewalk. So if there is a sidewalk program that's already in place, then we could continue on a sidewalk here. So
Well, to me, it seems like the rational nexus should be child safety. But this is actually an area that I hear from a lot. Actually, I also, full disclosure, travel this route to take both a high schooler and a middle schooler to school every single day. So I'm very well aware, as I'm sure all of us here are. But one of the unfortunate short sights in the newly constructed Columbia Central High School is that there is no sidewalk. You're having to sort of walk across grassy terrain in order to get basically from Baker Elementary School to the county park. And how we've had some conversations with Al Ray and others in our internal team about how is there a way to create some connectivity so that the schools can all be connected via sidewalk, make it safer, promote walkability. Now we have students that are walkers that are literally just running across Lyon Parkway because we don't have sidewalks and there's no sidewalk in front of Central. So all that to say, is this an opportunity that we could require? Because there is a sidewalk in front of the Dollar General area, which is where the actual school crosswalk is. And so do we have an opportunity to require the developer as a condition of approval out of safety concerns, which I think is a viable reason to provide sidewalk frontage in the right-of-way from where their development starts to connect to where the sidewalk begins at the Dollar General? Do we have the legal authority to require that?
I think the point made about adjacent schools, and certainly there's going to be school-age children that may walk from this development to the schools adjacent. However, I would maybe defer to Mr. Harper because we did make the point of a possible crosswalk, or are we just saying that maybe a potential sidewalk in front of the development leading to the crosswalk there at the traffic signal?
Well, I like the idea of a crosswalk as well, but I'm cognizant that there is a crosswalk right up the street, and I know that a crosswalk is different from a traffic signal, but I know you don't want to have traffic signals too close together. And here, I just wonder, especially with the amount of volume of traffic here, is that a safe place to even put a crosswalk, especially when you have signalization up above where the actual crosswalk exists?
Right, yeah, I would not think we would support a mid-block crosswalk here. We would direct any pedestrian to the signalized intersection and crosswalk that exists. As far as the legality of requiring the sidewalk, I don't know the answer to that, if we could require it all the way to the intersection. But I know that we do have grounds to require it in front of the development.
Is the city attorney with us? Mr. Tischer, Well, it doesn't, but if it's in the right of way, don't we have the ability to get the authority to allow him to do that? And therefore, then we have the authority to require him to do that?
I'd like to think that there are some ways that the city government, the county government, and private partnerships can work together to try to figure out a solution to make this more walkable for other schools that are in the area. So I think finding a solution would behoove every party involved in this.
Maybe Mr. Cullen maybe encourage, we can certainly ask the applicant, state the concern that there is a safety concern here and the potential of them providing a sidewalk in front of their property along Hampshire Pike. And in the future, that, an adjacent sidewalk were to develop, it certainly would connect with their sidewalk, and then we would begin the foundations of a sidewalk program here on the north side of Hampshire. Right away.
But we can't require him to connect it. So we can require him to connect it only upon his portion of his property, but we can't require him to connect it upon portion of property that we have control over. And out of a safety concern for children, that this would create some connectivity.
I would also like, this is state right away, so anything you do would be contingent on.
Out of curiosity, I was trying to pull up the map, but Mr. McCarthy, you may have it up. Is there a way to tell just roughly linear feet we're talking about?
It'd be a
You've already done-
450-foot gap.
Between, including the portion that's on his property as well. We're talking about a 450 gap from the end of his property.
From the end of his property to the connection.
Okay.
And it is a utility company that owns the adjacent property, so perhaps we could discuss this with the utility company and their willingness to participate or cooperate with some connectivity from a residential neighborhood to a safer crossing path. But if we're able to at least require sidewalk frontage subject to state right-of-way approval, Mr. Harper, if that's the minimum we can get, I would like to require that. But otherwise, it seems like everything. Are there any variances even being sought here, Mr. Keltner? Or Mr. I'm sorry, Mr. Brass?
No, sir, there was no variance request.
No variances. So based on that, Mayor, is that a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve, subject to technical comments, also subject to the requirement that a sidewalk be constructed along the frontage of the property, which is contingent upon state regulatory approvals as well.
Mayor Mulder, sorry to interrupt the motion. Just to be clear, the sidewalk would be constructed in front of the property going towards the signal, or the sidewalk along the entire frontage of the property?
I would like the entire frontage of the
Okay,
property.
thank you.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion, Dr. Martin?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I apologize. My question is in the staff report and their comments. Under the tree preservation plan, the response was that the trees had been removed under the old ordinance and land distribution permit prior to 4400. So is that saying that we can't do anything about the fact that the trees are gone and we can't require?
That's a great question, Dr. Morton. Unfortunately, under the previous zoning ordinance, whenever you had a straight zone, we never had a tree preservation plan in place. And so in this case, the applicants, with the development to the north, they went in and they clear-cutted the trees. I would like to just note, though, that's something that we have discussed internally. If somebody were to, let's say, take a piece of property under the current code and they wanted to clear-cut that property before coming in for a site development plan as a way to kind of escape the requirement, we would require a development permit for that tree removal, and a part of that we would look at the caliper widths of the trees to make sure where the heritage trees are, and then the trees that are being removed. And then at time of site development plan, they would certainly have to replant those trees. But in this case, we didn't have that opportunity because the code didn't require it under a straight zoning situation. So it is unfortunate that the trees are gone.
I was concerned because I know we had a situation on Mooresville Pike where we had to put some back. And so
Yes,
I
ma'am.
wanted to make sure that that wasn't an option here.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
It's unfortunate,
That
but
example was with a stream they took out in the riparian zone. And then that's what we had used to replace that.
I do have two people that signed up for Mary. I do have a motion. Is it okay to table your motion?
Yeah, or I'll just keep it subject. You can remain open, I believe, right?
Can I ask one little minor, ask a request to amend the motion to be a little bit more specific on the width of the sidewalk, or maybe have it comply to standards, or if it connects to, I think the adjacent one's 8 feet wide at that Dollar General Center. But I don't know if
typical
there's any
sidewalks
sort
5 feet, correct?
of parameters we want to put to that.
I think we could go against what our typical standard is.
What's that?
So
5
the-
feet?
Yes, sir, for a sidewalk.
That meets the ADA requirement at the 5 or the 8?
5 is the standard, and the ADA requirements would be where the sidewalk interacts with the street section.
So you're wanting an amended motion to make it 3 inches more than the standard requirement is?
No, just to put some parameters on it, to say, hey, that sidewalk has to be X.
Okay. Would it not have to be?
Which is 5 feet.
Okay.
5 feet.
Yes, sir.
If I need to or amend my motion to reflect that, but I would think that our standards as the sidewalks would be required to be enforced here, and that's what we wanted to do. Good. All right.
We hold that motion.
Yeah, motion.
All right, thank you. We have Eric McNeely. Don't know if you want to come forth and speak at all. I just have you on the list, so. Okay. Thank you. And same with Gerald Vick.
Good evening. I'm Gerald Vitt with WS Engineers. I'm here representing the property owner to the east of this property. And we just wanted to make one request that to make sure that they are proposing a retaining wall in the right of way adjacent to our property, to my client's property, and want to make sure that the planning commission considers putting maybe a decorative fence at the top of that wall, but the most important thing is a fence that will protect somebody from falling off that wall. Because they do mow, it starts to get steep right at the top there, so they mow and take care of their property. They have grandkids that come play over there. Just want to make sure that they do have a rail of some sort all along that property.
Thank you, Mr. Vick. Mr. Harper, is that a requirement on a retaining wall?
Yes, where pedestrians would be seen walking behind the possibility of pedestrian guardrail is required.
So in this case, if it's somebody's yard, pedestrians could be throughout the whole length of that property, so it would be required. If we would make that in the motion as a requirement, or would it be a requirement?
You can if you would like, but we'll require.
Okay.
So much like the sidewalk requirements, it's going to be required either way. So
Thank you, Mr. Vick. Any further amendment on the motion?
I don't think it needs to be. I mean, we know the sidewalk requirements are going to be required to be complied with. We know that the retaining wall requirements are going to be required to be complied with. So I'll stand on my motion. And Mr. Vick, if your clients want to help add to the sidewalk fund, let us know.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll call the vote.
Aye.
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 Aye. Item passes, subject to technical comments. Next item is Item 3 on our agenda, request from Louis Sloyan for a preliminary plat and site plan development plan for Oakwood subdivision consisting of 104 lots at 200 Oakwood Drive, being tax map 89, parcel 21.
Thank you, Mr. Goetz. And just for clarity, when the applicant does come up to speak, I know it was advertised in the application as 104, but on the site development plan, I had 103. So maybe just getting clarity on that. Nevertheless, the property is zoned CD3, and the site development plan does meet the current code for lot configuration and the proposed street network within the site. They are providing adequate civic space. One of the civic spaces being provided is a civic space green. They are asking for an administrative adjustment. Our current code requires 50% of that civic space to confront a thoroughfare, and they're providing 43% of that. However, it is within that 20% parameter that we've discussed with the administrative adjustment. So that's something that staff can support and has the authority to. The other civic space type that's being proposed is a playground. I would also like to note, and I did discuss this with the applicant, they are showing a civic space pocket park. However, that pocket park does not meet that enfrontment requirement, so it was discussed that that could just be an open space and not be counted towards civic space. They are over their civic space requirements, regardless with the pocket park or not. Would also like to note that they are showing retaining walls behind several lots within the development site. The zoning code does allow retaining walls within yards to not exceed 6 feet in the rear, so that would be a condition as noted, and that retaining wall be clad in the appropriate material. The tree preservation plan that was just pulled up, that may be the most sensitive part of this site development plan. The current zoning code, as Dr. Martin alluded to, does have a pretty significant tree preservation policy. And more specific to that, the specimen trees are required to be protected. There is a little nuance in the code. If the specimen trees are to be removed, so that's a tree that has a caliper inch greater than 24 inches, that does have to be replaced at a 2-to-1 ratio. I would like to note that the zoning code does go a little bit further and does state that if a specimen tree is to be removed, it has to be planted on the site that it was removed. And so that will require more trees on the lot than what's required. The base zoning code does require 1 shade tree when it does come to building permit. However, the specimen tree, unfortunately, the code does not allow it to be counted as a shade tree. So in this case, the applicant on their as approved would need to show where what the tree replanting policy is going to look like. It does meet the requirements for the tree save area that's showed in the hash color along the development side, and it does meet the adjacent buffer requirements. Also, the applicant is proposing to protect the existing tree line that's along North James Campbell Boulevard, which is a benefit because then that would limit visibility from the rear of those lots that would face James Campbell. Nevertheless, staff does have a condition sheet here noted that westbound turn lane along James Campbell at Oakwood be placed. We did discuss the specimen trees, retaining wall be an approved material type, not to exceed 6 feet, that we do receive an as approved, and that all other conditions and technical comments in the staff report be met.
So just for clarification on, some of these specimen trees, these heritage trees, some of them are very large trees, and so the 2-to-1 is just simply if you take down a 3-foot tree, you can plant two small trees to replace that. And they can be on the lots, or does it need to reserve that area or preserve that area as a pocket park?
No, sir. The way the code reads, it has to be in the area on which the tree was removed. So if you look at the proposed inventory of specimen trees, the ones that they're proposing to remove, they're within lot areas. And so that specimen tree would have to be replanted within that proposed new lot or building site on the development parcel. So you can see here where most of the specimen trees are being proposed to be removed are just south of that English oak court. There's a heavy pocket of them in that part of the development. And so that's the area where you would see the most tree preservation being replanted at.
But it's 2 caliper inches for every 1 inch removed. So you remove a 30-inch oak tree, you replace it with 60 caliper inches of another tree. The smallest tree you plant's 1.5 inches.
It's going to be a significant amount of trees.
It would be several trees, yes, sir.
Okay. And the applicant is here, I believe, Mr. Sloyan.
Yeah, it looks like the 622 caliper inches is what's being proposed for replacement plantings.
That'd be 1,244.
Yeah, it looks like they've indicated 311 inches of specimen tree calipers. And so with that ratio requirement, that's 622 caliper inches that have to be replaced.
Plant a 2-inch caliper tree, it's 300.
And so that does create, I think, when it comes time for site development, construction, the code does require them to have a barrier fence near the tree save area. And again, as approved, we would get a sheets just stating, hey, we're going to replant these trees at that ratio.
Dr. Martin.
Mr. Chairman, I need an explanation on number 4 and 5 in the engineering section where it speaks to the grading and drainage and their acknowledgement that they're going to use the Oklahoma style slabs, and the ones that are not configured for slab on grade, they're going to use Oklahoma style turn downs. What does that mean? What does both of those mean?
Yeah, I'd refer to Mr. Harper. The site does have some grading, and so when you do slab on grade, that creates somewhat challenge with the slope runoff.
Yeah, that is an issue that we have quite often is the lots are padded out for a slab on grade style home. Well, we have sites that have amount of grade to them, that padding messes up the lot-to-lot drainage and the drainage between the homes. So they have proposed to do a Oklahoma style or a turn down, which is basically a slab that looks like a crawl. So it's much taller on one side than the other. So it's essentially a retaining wall that is part of the structure. So it allows the home to fit with the grade and better serve the drainage.
Okay, my next question is under wastewater, where we're beginning to talk about the sewer on Dahlia Lane, and the pump station is now, the allocation is a 50-foot times 50-foot. Speak to me about what's going on there. That's under wastewater.
Basically, I believe what they're saying is that they're acknowledging that wastewater is requiring them to design the pump station to where it can be removed in the future, so that it can be gravity fed toward Dolly Lane, which is, I'm trying to think of the name of that, Royal Oaks.
Subdivision right next to it.
Is where they're looking at. The city has some planned improvements in that area in the future. Once that's complete, then this should be able to be gravity sewered through the Royal Oaks Basin. The pump station area is just them making the comment that the size and location where the pump is to be placed should be at least a 50 by 50. And that them also acknowledging that they will do a 50 by 50 spot there for that pump.
But the ultimate plan is to get it to the gravity fed when we do whatever we do.
Is to design it to where essentially when the improvements are done in Royal Oak sewer basin, that they can essentially just put a small piece in place, remove the pump, and then it just gravities through Royal Oak subdivision.
Okay, thank you.
And there is a new proposed 50 by 50 pump station within this site development plan that's shown within an open space lot.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Brass, I believe we have Mr. Sloyan here. Maybe. Hi there.
How are you doing? I'm here to answer any questions that you guys might have or
I
talk
just
through.
want to make sure you were aware of the discussion of these heritage trees and the volume of the replacement trees that will be required to put on the site.
It is a little recent to us as of this afternoon, so I haven't had a full chance to talk through it with the developer. We'll be looking further at that to make sure we can comply with that.
Is that something then, if you want to have a time to discuss that, would you would it be deemed appropriate for a deferral to allow you time to discuss that since it's recent information to you?
I don't think we want a deferral at this time. I believe if it's possible to move forward with that being a condition, and we can keep working with staff on that to make sure that it's in concurrence with standards, we'd like to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Slang. Questions, Dr. Martin?
I'm in agreement with what you said.
Yeah, I mean, I think just in light of what you just said is concerning to me that, this is new to you. So I think based upon that, I feel inclined to do a motion to defer to allow time to review that new information with your client.
Okay.
And I have a motion on the table too.
Second.
With a second by Dr. Martin. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll call the vote.
Councilman Coleman,
Aye.
Dr. Martin,
Aye.
Mayor Mulder,
Aye.
Mr. Shannon,
Aye.
Mr. Sloan,
Aye.
Ms. Williams. Aye. Mr. Goetz.
Aye. Items deferred. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question?
Yes.
So what additional information should we have for you next month for this item?
Just making sure that they're understanding and agreement with this new information pertaining to the volumetry requirements that this was new information to them today.
Okay, just to clarify, so this is a requirement of the zoning ordinance that was a requirement of the zoning ordinance when they asked to rezone this property and when they proposed the site development plan to begin with. So it shouldn't be a surprise to them, but we will communicate.
Right, but he just said that he wanted to see if they even want to proceed forward. So, I mean, based upon that, I could assume that they might want to even change the plan or something. So, yeah, thanks. All right, next item on our agenda, item 4, request from Cole Newton to rezone properties located at East 13th and East 14th Streets, being tax map 100L Group F, parcels 21.8, 9, 9.01, 10, and 11, from SDLI Light Industrial Special District to CD3 Neighborhood Character District, and CD3 Neighborhood Character District to a CD4 General Urban Character District.
Thanks, sir. This is a request to rezone the property that spans the middle of the block between East 13th and East 14th Street. Most of the property is currently zoned SDLI. That's our light industrial zoning. One of those parcels that you listed off is zoned CD3, which is our basic residential neighborhood zoning. The applicant is requesting to rezone it to CD4, your general urban neighborhood character district. The future land use of the property is City Center Urban Village, and that is implemented by CD4 as well as CD5 and CD4C. The applicant's concept plan shows the southern portion of the property developed as 10 townhomes, and the remaining improvements on the northern portion of the property the existing improvements on the northern portion of the property to remain for now. The only thing I would note is that the existing improvements on the northern portion of the property would be non-conforming to CD4, so if somebody goes in there and wants to do a change of use or make any significant modifications, that would trigger coming into conformity with the standard of CD4 if this rezoning is approved. The criteria for rezoning are at 8519. Those criteria are listed on page 5 of your zoning ordinance, and the approval, there's sample motions for an action on page 7 of the staff report. I said zoning ordinance before. I apologize. I meant staff report.
Thank you. I see Mr. Newton did sign up. Mr. Newton.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Cole Newton with TKC. I mean, I don't really have anything to add to it. The owner is aware of the building on the north side, his understanding in that, and is in agreement with that, what Mr. McCarthy just put out there.
So the intent at this moment is just to proceed with the south side as far as development.
Yes.
I drove by the site today. Just might have it looks like is part of it filled. Do you know? Have you visited the site?
Yeah, it's got a fall off to it. So I mean, it's gonna take some dirt work to get it to work. And I think it's we've got the townhomes pulled to the front, and we I think this preliminary level we don't have good good topo data yet. But I mean, as we pull that in, there will be some dirt work that'll be required to make it happen. But I think the layout shows it can be done.
Gotcha.
It is worth noting, Mr. Chairman, that there are pending zoning text amendments in front of City Council right now that would require a buffer for a CD4 property. It's not currently required, so a portion of this property does border single-family residential on the west side, so that buffer would apply there. I think they can accomplish it, but that would be new probably by the time they would come in for a site development plan if the rezoning is accomplished. And there are some things that would allow sort of a different orientation than what's shown in the concept plan. So there'd be a different menu of options for putting townhomes on the site or any other conforming use on the site.
So, Mr. Newton, are you aware that those changes may be forthcoming that your clients would have to comply with?
Yes, sir. I think we looked at those. I mean, those came through maybe May-ish, February, whenever those, like, when all the items y'all have worked on now, I think we're tracking them and what you push online. But, I mean, we're slid over to try to give that buffer. I mean, I don't think we'll have a problem complying.
And this request conforms to our comp plan, our everything.
Yes, sir, it is consistent with the comprehensive plan.
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
A motion by the mayor, second by Mr. Coleman. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll call the vote.
Councilman Coleman,
Aye.
Dr. Martin,
Aye.
Mayor Mulder,
Aye.
Mr. Shannon,
Aye.
Mr. Sloan,
Aye.
Ms. Williams,
Aye.
Mr. Good.
Aye. Items approved. Thank you, Mr. Newton.
Thank y'all.
Next item on the agenda tonight is request number 5, request from I guess I'll read it anyway.
Yes, sir. We'll take a motion.
Request from Emily Zeller for a mixed-use preliminary PUD master plan with architectural design review approval to revise 3.97 acres of the Villages at Carter's Creek PUD located at 2425 Nashville Highway, being tax map 51, parcel 22.03. It's noted on our packet here that the applicant has requested a deferral. Based on the applicant's request, I will make a motion to defer.
Second.
I have a second by Dr. Martin. Any discussion?
Just to confirm, this will be on the September agenda.
Yes.
And it looks like through their emails, they just had some scheduling conflicts and weren't going to be able to have someone attend. And so that's what the request is for.
That is correct.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll call the vote.
Councilman Coleman,
Aye.
Dr. Martin,
Aye.
Mayor Mulder,
Aye.
Mr. Shannon,
Aye.
Mr. Sloan,
Aye.
Ms. Williams,
Aye.
Mr. Good.
Aye. Item is deferred. Next item on our agenda, item 6, request from Gray Harrison for preliminary PUD master plan approval for Honey Farm subdivision consisting of 174 townhomes and 9 open space lots at tax map 51, parcel 58 off Honey Farm Way.
Thank you, Mr. Goetz. This request is a new site development plan that fully falls under the new zoning code for 174 townhome units. It's located just on the north side of Honey Farm Way. It's currently a vacant piece of property. Within this site development plan, the applicant is asking for several deviations from the base zoning code. One deviation that is being requested is there is a 75-foot buffer that is required on the north side of the boundary. The applicant is requesting to allow for walkways, driveways, and alleys to encroach into that 75-foot buffer where Mr. McCarthy is alluding to there. The next deviation is regarding fire access and hose pull apparatuses. The fire code requires all units to be within 150 feet of a hose pull from the apparatus. And it is not customary for fire apparatuses to utilize alley sections. And working with the applicant in coordination with the fire marshal, there was a proposal to deviate from our minimum 20-foot alleyway standard to go to a 30-foot alleyway standard in order to get a fire apparatus along there. Those two alleys that they are deviating from is alley number C and alley number E. So if you can see here in the site development plan, that is alley C, that is a 30-foot extension, and those units are confronting a pedestrian path. And so the zoning code does require 20% of units to also confront a pedestrian path and not a true physical street right away. The next deviation that's being requested is for the design elevations of the window seal height. The requirement is 5 feet. They are requesting it to be 4 feet. However, that is within the 20% staff administrative adjustment. One of the other variance deviation requests that they're asking is for the townhomes regarding setbacks. There is a 10-foot minimum setback between townhome units, and they're requesting a setback of 7.5 feet. And then also they're requesting the setback to be measured from the center line of the alley. So the base zoning does have a setback of 10 feet, and it does not allow the setback to be measured from the center line. Would like to note, though, that is typical in other zoning ordinances when it's alley loaded to have a setback measured from that center line. One of the most significant deviations that staff had most concern with was the use of retaining walls on this site. The zoning code does not allow retaining walls to go beyond 3 feet in the front yard setback, and then does not allow retaining walls to go beyond 4 feet in the side setback. So as you can see here, the applicant eloquently put this depiction together to help the commission kind of understand where they are deviating from the retaining wall height. So any line that you see in red here is indication of a deviation beyond the 3 feet requirement. Likewise, any line that's proposed in the green, it does meet the code requirements for retaining walls. The applicant did also provide a cut sheet on an additional page to help kind of understand when you're going down Honey Farm Way, for example, what this might look like when you're seeing elevations above a retaining wall. And then there's also a section of townhomes where the retaining wall actually, the front porch of the unit is below the retaining wall. And so you'll open your door and you'll look up and you'll see a retaining wall, as you can see here in this part of the cut sheet. So that was something staff did have concern with. The reason, from my understanding of the excessive use of retaining walls here, is it is a slab on grade footing, a monolithic footing being proposed. Thus, when you're doing that type of footing and not doing walkout basements, for this particular site, it requires these retaining walls. Regarding civic space, the site development plan does meet the adequate civic space requirements, and then also does meet the adequate right-of-way requirements. I would like to note there was one additional deviation regarding an alleyway. As you can see here on the very bottom right of the development site, there's an alleyway that does not terminate into a right-of-way or another alleyway. And so the applicant did list here all of their variance requests or deviation requests with justification for those requests. Regarding the design elevations, it does meet the code standards utilizing brick base and fiber cement board materials. And then staff did provide the conditions of approval if the Planning Commission did want to request that this move on to City Council with a favorable recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Brass. We
Thank
have
you.
some people in the audience that signed up. I know we have the applicant, Gray Harrison, and I may put him on the backside and go with Drew Smith first that signed up.
I'm just here to answer any questions.
Okay. We also have a Jason Tabor. Same? Okay. So all are representatives of the applicant. Okay. Does anybody have any of you three want to come forward and or discuss anything, or are you just here for questions? Okay. So I just want to make sure I'm understanding these deviations that are requested. Several of these sound concerning. One, the first one being the one you mentioned about the fire. Obviously, when we say fire and a deviation, I get concerned. So the fire code says that they have to be within 150 feet, not achievable. So they want to use these alleyways to access that. So
That's right, Mr. Goetz. This would be a nuance to my understanding. We have yet to see something come through where we allowed an extended alleyway section where a fire truck can go down. The fire marshal did also add, it is also noted in the report that if these alley sections are utilized, that there be a white sign with red letters stating no parking, fire access at each end of the 30-foot alleys, and then every 100 feet within the alleys to be placed. And so I think one of the concerns was it is pretty typical that when alleys are there, folks sometimes will maybe have a car in an alleyway that could adversely affect an apparatus going down there. And so the fire marshal, in coordination with the applicant, thought that may be a solution. Initially, they did propose some sort of pedestrian walk. That didn't meet our code because pedestrian walks aren't meant for fire apparatuses to ever go down. So I would just like to note, if the commission did grant this deviation, it would be a nuance to our zoning code.
Dr. Martin.
Mr. Brass, so we're discussing this deviation, and we're gonna put up some signs with red letters on them and expect the weather not to deface them signs, and then we have a car parked in there, and then we have a fire truck that can't get through. I just,
Yeah.
thank you.
I think we were trying to be accommodating,
Okay.
and life safety certainly is at the top of all
Top
precedents.
of the list.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, may I add to Austin's
Yes.
presentation on these alleys? So just to be 100% clear, we required this application to go through Development Review Committee twice. They had both times proposed the pedestrian enfrontment, that the walkway would be wide enough and have a curb cut that would allow fire apparatus to go down it. Without that, they wouldn't be able to, so units 69 through 73 here would be outside of the hose pole reach for fire, so the fire marshal wouldn't allow those units there because they couldn't get to it. So that walkway was a solution to get fire access while also using that alternative enfrontment 20% option that Austin mentioned. As staff, we were just really concerned that if you've got a wide stretch of pavement in front of homes that has a curb cut or a mountable curb, people are going to drive down it and they're going to park on it, and it's not really what was intended for that 20% alternative enfrontment. And they had, our standard alley section is 20 feet of right-of-way with 16 feet of pavement. So we talked with them about maybe modifying their requested deviation to be this 30-foot alleyway with 20 feet of pavement and additional width to run a water line down there and put a hydrant. And then so that's why the signs to discourage people from parking in that wider alley. So either option would be a deviation. Our thinking was this was the less objectionable deviation from the standards, but that's how we got to this.
So I think we could agree if they did lose units 69 to 73, and then on the other section of the screen, the other middle units where the apparatus does not have to go down an alley, but they can still reach the 150-foot hose pull from the right-of-way, that would be something that, would be conducive, but it's the choice to, have those units there in the middle, which is in turn driving this alley section to be extended for the apparatus to drive down it.
And just so I make sure I understand, this is a PUD
PUD-R.
PUD-R. We're looking at a new site plan. So
All new code, yes,
all
sir.
new code. Okay.
Yep.
And speaking of the fire, and I want to go back to maybe some time back when we looked at this before, I feel like there was some concerns about fighting a fire, even off of Honey Farm Way or whatever that road is called, with it having to have, now we're talking about a pretty heavy retaining wall and then an elevated dwelling above that. Was there any concerns from fire about even fighting that? Because it looks like there's an alleyway behind those, so it looks like the only access to fight those fires would be from
Honey Farm Way. Yeah, to my understanding, there wasn't any concern about that because Honey Farm Way was in front of those units, but it is something to note. The units will sit much higher.
Yeah.
There is, you can see here in the depiction on the cut sheet that they are proposing a stairway, between the units to go down to the sidewalk on Honey Farm Way. But certainly, as a fire service worker, you typically, find it from the street. And so it'll may create a unique situation for their host pool.
Yeah. And I believe we have the app, somebody, Mr. Smith, I think, raised his hand, so.
I'd just like to add to that comment. I'm Drew Smith. I'm the property owner. Mr. Getz, what you're referring to on a previous review of this, the fire marshal was satisfied with the length of the hose and the ability to fight it from Honey Farm Way. And I don't remember exactly, but I think a lot of those along Honey Farm were 3 stories. And they're not proposing any 3 stories in this scenario. And we've met with the fire marshal on several occasions, including this alley access for the hose pool. And that's never been brought up with this site plan.
I just wanted to ask for some clarification, as it was something from last.
Okay.
Thank you.
But the fire marshal has been in discussion with the applicant related to this solution for the alley width to allow for a fire truck to really just pull in. It's not really through access. It's just to get it within 150 feet.
Right.
Yeah, I'm Josh Rowland with Kimley Horn, representing the applicant. I just wanted to tack on a few things to what Kevin had mentioned. I think first, most important is we've been through a couple of rounds with the DRC and have worked collaboratively with planning staff and engineering staff and the fire department to get to the site plan that you see today. This particular issue about the alley deviation is to serve 2 buildings on the site, and those are just the 2 that are embedded on those sections that in front the civic space. It's a fire access route that meets all fire code standards. The reason we went from a 20-foot alley to a 30-foot is to get 20 feet of pavement and to allow for hydrants in the alley. So that's a public right of way in those alleys. The city has the right to enforce, vehicles that are parked illegally in that alley. And secondly, those driveways where we have, where they're located along that 30-foot alley, those are going to be 28-foot long driveways. So there's plenty of room for those cars to park. So those are just points that I wanted to make, that we have worked with the fire department. We've provided a solution that they have said that they agree with. And so that's what we're presenting tonight in regards to the alleys.
While working with staff, did you try to reduce the amount of deviations that you're requesting to conform to our new PUD?
We did, and I think there's some not conflicting, but some conditions in the PUD standards that almost counteract each other, especially on a site where you have some topography. You've got lot and block configurations that require frontages that are only so far away from the right of way. You've got requirements that all buildings must front streets. And so when you try to apply those standards on a site that has some topography, you have to use other methods to meet those requirements. And so, what we've done is tried to minimize to the greatest extent possible those conditions. And we have improved them over the course of the 2 sessions with staff. And I think today, I know we are requesting deviations, but they're deviations that we feel like meet the intent of the PUD-R requirements, and also just work with the existing site conditions.
So just maybe for staff, we adopted this new PUD-R standard. Is this one of the first requests to try to come in and conform to our new PUD-R standard? How many have we had come forth for us?
You recommended denial for a PUD-R master plan on this site about a year ago.
And that would have been under the...
Think of it.
That might,
Most of our PUD's been previous PUD.
Yeah.
Requests.
So I think you had, Good Bear Bluffs. So you had 3 PUD-R requests, 2 of them for this site, including the one in front of you.
And I think if you were to compare the PUD-R that was denied for this site before with ours today, ours is a much more attractive PUD. We have a much better presence along Honey Farm Way. Our walls are shorter, our buildings are shorter. And again, we're just, we're dealing in Middle Tennessee here with sites that have topography and some of these lot and block requirements that, generally want sites to be flat. And so when we're kind of dealing with, 2 various sections of the code. We're making, the best solution possible. And we worked with staff to get to where we're at today to bring a plan we feel like is minimizing the amount of deviations that we need. It may be worth mentioning too that the old PUD for this site was approved for 280 apartments, and today we're requesting 174 townhomes. So we're trying to reduce the density and provide a quality product for the city as well.
So to your point, Josh, are you saying that the product is what's driving the grades that we're seeing here on this? That a different product may actually lessen the grade?
Well, I think if you're getting to, the type of a walkout type product might lessen the grades, it also increases the building heights, which we heard was an undesirable component of the previous PUD. So I think, we're proposing a slab on grade product, but we provided a solution that I think minimizes some of the negative aspects of the previous PUD.
Mr. Getz, I'd like to add one more thing.
Please, Mr.
The previous PUD R site plan that came through was denied, wasn't even discussed here. It was denied, it came before the board, but it was denied due to infrastructure, which we have a solution on the wastewater that we've worked out with Mr. Bashir's and Mr. Filipkowski at the wastewater department. And so that piece of that previous request has been, in our opinion, is resolved.
Right.
It's not completely solved, but it will be solved as part of this process.
Yeah, and that hasn't come up as a concern tonight.
Okay.
But I'm glad you brought that up, because originally that was a concern that we raised. And so there has been some work done in that regard to where it is now no longer something that we're even discussing as a result of those conversations.
That's correct.
And, my last comment about the walls and the alleys is we really worked hard to limit where we needed those deviations. This isn't a deviation that we need for all the buildings and for all the lots. We've got isolated conditions where those walls do exceed the heights. And we believe the product that we're proposing and the conditions that we've set are, the most ideal for the project that we're proposing tonight.
Dr. Martin, you got your hand up.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. How many deviations are we asking for on this PUD R for this development total?
Just to go over side setback deviation, a rear setback deviation, components into a parcel buffer, an alleyway deviation, facade window sill height deviation, retaining wall deviation, and those are all of the deviations and a deviation for the alleyway to not connect with another alleyway or thoroughfare.
And
My apologies, I didn't keep tally. I think
on the alleyway part, who's responsible to maintain that? Is the city or the housing HOA or the development? Who maintains that?
Typically, it is right of way. I know, Glenn, we've kind of had this discussion. It can either be public and or private, but typically
The intent is for these to be
public right of way.
Okay, thanks.
So that kind of goes back if there was an issue, maybe with a vehicle parking in an alleyway, our police folks would have to maybe deal with that.
Mr. Brass, thank you for the report. Just for clarity, the only deviation they're asking for the alleyway is to make it wider.
That's correct. To go from 20 feet, that's allowed in our code, to 30 feet.
Yeah.
And that's just for
those two sections.
Alley E, Alley C, and Alley E. Yes, sir. And then the other additional alleys meet our code at 20 feet.
The alley connecting street to street.
And then the alley, that doesn't connect.
The shortened one.
Yes,
the
sure.
dead end alley.
That's right.
I guess it's not a deviation for the request to use an alley for fire access. It's just a nuance, I think was the word used.
I would say more of a nuance than a deviation, because we're only concerned, of course, at this point our zoning code standards, and so they're asking again to extend, and then the reason is for fire access as their justification for that request.
No, it is a deviation to widen the alley.
Yeah.
The pavement itself from 16 to 20.
And the purpose of that was for the fire.
Correct.
They wouldn't use it without it.
Yeah.
Right. And speaking, I'm sorry. I just want to point out, speaking of Fire Marshal, we're physically connected to him, so there's been a lot said about what he said or what he may feel. So I feel like being connected to him, working with him every day, and hearing a lot of these conversations. I know they have been working with the Fire Marshal, but I think it might be a little bit of a stretch to say that he's fine with it.
Right.
I think that he looked at it and saw the breaks in the retainer walls, which was a comment to have those breaks put in. It met the code. So from his opinion, what he's looking at it meets the code.
And I was going to point out, he's not here for us to ask those questions. So, yeah.
Right.
So, thanks.
Was there any discussion to maybe go a little bit further and sprinkle the units that were outside of the 150 foot?
I personally discussed that with the fire marshal, and that was something he did not want to recommend.
Okay.
It's just, where is it? It's 4 here and it's 40 on the next one, I think, what his concern is.
So, just from the criteria items that we have for consideration tonight, 8.521B, Master Plan Development Plan Approval. First item on that bullet point is conforms to the applicable standards and requirements of this ordinance. Safe to say that with all these deviations that are being requested, it does not conform to our PUD-R ordinance.
It would not conform to the straight standard of the ordinance.
Well, I think with the volume of deviations that are being requested today and the fact that they don't conform, I'm going to make a motion to deny this plan that's presented here today based on that 8.521B A 3A.
Second.
Have a second by Mr. Shannon. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll call the vote.
Councilman Coleman,
Aye.
Dr. Martin,
Aye.
Mayor Mulder, Mr. Shannon,
Aye.
Mr. Sloan,
Aye.
Ms. Williams,
Aye.
Mr. Goode.
Aye. Request is denied. Next item on our agenda is, well, it's actually our last item, which brings us to other business.
Yes, sir. So just to clarify, you've made a recommendation of denial to the city council.
That's correct.
That's correct. So, yeah, just to be clear, the applicant, I guess, still has the right to take this to city council with a recommendation of denial. That's correct.
So just a couple of quick updates. You had your study session last week. I did a poor job of explaining one of the issues we'd come up with signage. So I had an example. Some of y'all know Bryson Leach. He does a lot of sign work around town. This example from the church on Carmack, that site is where I first came across this problem of not having a campus sign provision. We've come across it a few times since then, but it's just an illustration of how, so you can see visually, these signs direct people around to buildings within that campus. It's larger than the 4 square foot incidental directional sign that's exempt from a permit and would exceed the number of signs permitted on the site. So that's where the idea comes from for properties like this to be able to direct people to multiple buildings within their campus and be in conformity with the zoning ordinance. So that's what we'll be discussing next month at your special voting session. We'll have a proposal related to that. I'm sure you all are aware that in your next round of zoning text amendments, you'll be studying the use table and limited use standards, including short-term rentals. And we have stepped up. We've been a little bit lax in our enforcement since the zoning ordinance was adopted in July of 2022. We've stepped up our enforcement, and we've also scheduled a public forum to sort of facilitate a community conversation about short-term rentals and hear what the public wants so that you all have that information going into your study session in November. And that is scheduled for October 23rd in this room at 5 p.m. There's a special page on our website. The flyer I gave you, that QR code, will take you to it. There's also a survey online, so for people who can't attend in person, they can voice their thoughts and give us suggestions on how the community would like to regulate short-term rentals. And then finally, we had a test session with the provider of your agenda software, Civic Clerk. Their product developers were on the line with us. Our MIS folks were in the room. We had a bunch of staff sort of pretending to be you all, going through a mock meeting. The voting
kinda
worked
fun.
well. They've
Yeah, it was kind of fun.
They have added some features so that you still have the option to go in and manually vote if there's any issue with getting the vote out to when the clerk pushes out the vote. If it doesn't go to you for some reason, you can still go in and cast your vote. So we tested it. We tried to break it. We couldn't. So we're pretty confident that if it's the pleasure of the chairman, we can go back to electronic voting in September. And then just the last thing I'd mention, since I have the floor, is that y'all noticed that Austin had the lion's share of the workload this month on the current planning agenda. And he did a fantastic job with a bunch of really complicated site plans. So congrats to Austin on that.
Thank you. Good luck with the October meeting. Thanks for taking and heading that up. That's going to be a big undertaking. Appreciate that. Thank you, Austin, and Mr. Archibald for the presentations tonight. So and you as well, Mr. McCarthy. Appreciate that. Any other discussion for questions? Seeing none, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
We have a second by Mr. Sloan. We'll call the vote.
Councilman Coleman,
He left.
sorry, Dr. Martin,
Aye.
Mayor Mulder,
Thank you.
Mr. Shannon,
Aye.
Mr. Sloan,
Aye.
Ms. Williams, Mr. Goetz.
Aye. Meeting adjourned.
Hey, Kevin.
I think they do.